The Adventures of Bad Boy and Dirty Girl is the 7th episode of the 3rd season of Frasier. This is directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about this episode. And to be honest, I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's no secret that I'm not a huge fan of Kate as a character, and the bulk of this episode is about Frasier's relationship with Kate. I guess that's the right word to use here. And we do have some really good moments. So all my thoughts are chronological. And in general, I will just say it's a good episode. I would never intentionally choose to watch it, though, if I were to be seeking out a specific episode of Frasier. So it starts off in Cafe Nervosa. We have Niles there, and then Frasier is actually meeting Kate, and they have a brief discussion, and then Roz comes along, and it turns out that Frasier and Roz are actually having to fill the 8 o'clock slot that evening, which Roz is not too happy about, but this does facilitate the main part of the episode. And we do find out, before we get to that point, that Daphne is aware that something must have happened with Kate, because Daphne had been washing Frasier's shirt and there was lipstick on it and buttons missing, and Daphne was brilliant in this. If I had to pick one character who provided most of the comedy for this, I would say it was Daphne. Daphne is definitely the biggest takeaway for me from this in terms of being a funny episode. That's not to say Frasier wasn't funny, but for me, Daphne was significantly funnier. We also have a tiny part of the narrative focusing on a character called Dierdre, played by Pamela Kosh. She lives in the building, but she's actually moving out, and she manages to convince Martin to go to her bedroom and help her with the lock on a suitcase. And she's a writer, and she's named or she's designed one of her characters called Lorenzo in Martin's image, which is, it's good fun. Martin's response, the way he looked back at Frasier when Deirdre dragged him out of the apartment, loved it. Very funny as well. And then we have the 8 o'clock show down at KCL. Frasier tells Roz that he's got everything covered. She can go on the date that she was meant to be going on. She doesn't hesitate. She flees, as one would expect in that situation. It's not exactly the time slot anybody wants to be doing. And then Kate comes in, and they both agree, Frasier and Kate, that they need to take things slow, which I think is kind of interesting. It's not that they were just calling off the relationship because they thought it was inappropriate, which is, to be honest, the way I think things should have gone, or at least I expected. But the fact that they decided to take things more slowly is a different approach. But of course, it doesn't last very long. And for about a minute, maybe longer, they just call each other bad boy and dirty girl, and then they end up sleeping together on air. And what I hadn't expected with this episode, I can't remember if I felt this the first time I watched the episode, but certainly watching it now, I couldn't remember what happened. And what really surprised me is that people obviously heard this, people were tuned into the station, but they didn't know it was Kate. Of course, they knew it was Frasier because it was his show, but they didn't know that it was Kate. And that's really interesting. And I think it worked very well by not making it clear that it was her, because it then meant that she could suspend Frasier. Not necessarily because she wanted to, but if one of her employees has done that kind of thing on air, she needs to be able to show that actually the station won't stand for that, so she had to suspend him. It was a bit harsh to do it in front of Roz and Bulldog, but nevertheless, that's the way it went. And Kate goes to Frasier's apartment, and this is a scene that I think lasted way longer than it needed to. I just didn't find it very interesting. It's the scene in the service elevator. But before we get there, we do get another fantastically funny moment, because Daphne and Martin and Niles all know it was Kate. They knew it was Kate on the radio with Frasier, and they're about to take Eddie for a walk so that Frasier and Kate can be alone. And Eddie has something on his chin, and Daphne asks him if he's been in the garbage again. You dirty boy. And Niles, Daphne, and Martin have their backs to us. They're about to walk out the door, but in that moment, their heads just slightly shift a little bit. Kate looks like a deer in headlights. It's very funny. It's brilliantly done. So that bit I really loved. But then we get the scene in the service elevator, and it was okay. They get stuck in there, the lights are out, but honestly, I just found that it went on for way longer than at least I would have liked. Had it been a bit more brief, it might have been okay, but it's also worth remembering that I don't care for Kate either. So 50% of the characters on screen during that time I did not care for. But granted, my love of Frasier is greater than my love of one character, so he does elevate things a little bit. But at the same time, it's still Kate, and I don't care for her. I wouldn't say I dislike her. I just don't find her to be a very interesting character. And that means that whenever she's on screen, and things usually are focusing on her, I'm just not that bothered. But that being said, I didn't dislike the episode. I still think it's got some really funny moments, really entertaining, some surprising narrative progression, such as people not realising it was Kate. But I think that was the right decision. Just because it's not what I expected doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And in fact, I think it's better that they didn't know it was her. Otherwise, things might have gone a different direction and it might not have worked as well. So, a good episode, not a personal favourite, but still some really good moments.